Most people think the matrix is something outside of them. They imagine powerful people, hidden systems, or forces controlling their life from a distance. It sounds dramatic, but it also feels easier to believe. Because if control is outside, then the problem is not you. But what if that idea is only a distraction? What if the real matrix is much closer, inside your own mind? The thoughts you repeat every day, the beliefs you never question, the habits that run automatically. These are what quietly shape your life. You think you are choosing freely, but many of your decisions come from patterns you did not consciously create. You react the same way, think the same way, and stay in the same cycles without noticing. This audiobook is not about fear or conspiracy. It is about awareness. When you begin to see how your own thinking controls your behavior, something changes. You stop blaming the outside, and you start understanding the inside. And that is where real freedom begins. Chapter 1. The mind creates invisible patterns. The mind does not operate randomly. It builds patterns quietly, shaping how you think, feel, and act without asking for your awareness. These patterns are not visible, yet they influence nearly every decision you make. A reaction that feels natural, a thought that feels true, or a habit that feels automatic often comes from something repeated many times before. The mind observes, learns, and stores these repetitions as a system. Over time, this system becomes so familiar that you stop noticing it. You believe you are choosing freely, but many of your choices follow these invisible patterns. They guide your behavior without effort because they have been practiced long enough to require no attention. This is how control begins, not through force, but through repetition that becomes automatic. From early experiences, the mind starts forming these patterns. It learns how to respond to situations, how to interpret events, and how to react emotionally. Each experience leaves an imprint. When something similar happens again, the mind does not start from the beginning. It applies what it has already learned. This creates consistency, but it also creates limitation. The response feels immediate because it is not being created in the moment. It is being repeated. Over time, these repeated responses become the default way of thinking. The person may not remember when the pattern started, but it continues guiding behavior. These patterns remain invisible because they feel normal. When a thought appears repeatedly, it begins to feel like part of your identity. You stop questioning it because it has always been there. A belief such as, "This is just how I am," often comes from repeated thinking rather than truth. The mind accepts familiarity as reality. This makes it difficult to recognize that these patterns are learned. They do not announce themselves as habits. They appear as natural thoughts, making them harder to notice. The mind prefers efficiency. It does not want to analyze every situation from the beginning. Instead, it creates shortcuts through patterns. These shortcuts allow quick responses, but they also reduce awareness. When a situation appears, the mind applies a familiar pattern instantly. This speed makes it feel like a natural reaction. In reality, it is a learned response being repeated. The faster the mind operates, the less likely you are to question it. This is why patterns remain hidden. Emotional responses are also shaped by these invisible patterns. A situation may trigger anxiety, frustration, or hesitation without clear reason. The emotion feels immediate, but it is often connected to past experiences. The mind has linked similar situations with specific feelings and repeats them automatically. This creates a cycle where the same emotions appear in similar circumstances. The person may believe the situation is causing the emotion, but the pattern is influencing the reaction. Attention strengthens these patterns further. What you focus on repeatedly becomes more dominant in your thinking. If your attention often returns to doubt, the mind strengthens that pathway. If it focuses on growth, it strengthens a different one. Over time, attention reinforces certain patterns, making them more automatic. The mind becomes skilled at producing what it practices most. This process happens quietly, shaping your thinking without conscious effort. Another reason these patterns remain invisible is because they operate continuously. They are not occasional thoughts. They are constant processes running in the background. The mind repeats them so often that they blend into daily life. You do not notice them because they are always there. This constant repetition creates a stable system that feels permanent. The person begins to believe that their thinking cannot change because it has been consistent for so long. External influences also contribute to these patterns. Conversations, environments, and repeated messages shape how the mind thinks. The brain absorbs what it is exposed to frequently and turns it into internal patterns. Over time, these influences become part of the system guiding behavior. The person may not realize how much of their thinking comes from external repetition. It feels like their own, even though it was shaped by what they experienced. Breaking these patterns begins with awareness. When you start observing your thoughts, you begin to notice repetition. You see how the same ideas appear in different situations. This recognition reveals the pattern. Instead of reacting automatically, you begin to question it. This creates a gap between thought and action. In that gap, control becomes possible. The pattern is no longer invisible. Once a pattern is seen, it can be changed. The mind can learn new ways of thinking through repetition. Just as patterns were built over time, they can be reshaped the same way. This process requires consistency. Each time you respond differently, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen a new one. The change is gradual, but it becomes powerful through repetition. Understanding that the mind creates invisible patterns changes how you see your behavior. You realize that many reactions are not fixed traits. They are learned responses. This realization removes the feeling of limitation. You begin to see that change is possible because the patterns are not permanent. They are simply practiced. In the end, these invisible patterns shape your life quietly. They guide your decisions, reactions, and direction without being noticed. But the moment you begin to see them, they lose their control. Awareness turns the invisible into something you can understand and guide. From that point, your thinking begins to change, and with it, your actions and outcomes. Chapter 2. Repetition becomes reality. Repetition is the mechanism through which the mind builds its version of reality. What you think once may pass unnoticed, but what you think repeatedly begins to shape how you see the world. The mind does not separate truth from repetition. It treats familiarity as evidence. When an idea appears again and again, it starts feeling accurate, even if it was never examined closely. This is how thoughts become beliefs. Over time, those beliefs guide perception. You begin noticing things that confirm them and ignoring what contradicts them. Reality starts to align with what has been repeated internally. This process is quiet, gradual, and often unnoticed. It does not require strong emotion or dramatic events. It only requires consistency. What you repeat becomes what you expect, and what you expect becomes what you see. The mind learns through exposure and reinforcement. Each time a thought is repeated, the brain strengthens its pathway. This makes it easier for that thought to appear again. Over time, certain ideas become dominant because they have been practiced more often. The person may not remember when the repetition began, but its influence becomes clear in how they think and act. This is why small, repeated thoughts can have a larger impact than occasional strong ones. The frequency of repetition matters more than intensity. What is practiced regularly becomes automatic. Repetition also shapes emotional responses. When a person repeatedly associates certain situations with specific feelings, Those emotions become predictable. For example, if the mind repeatedly connects challenge with fear, fear becomes the default response. This connection feels immediate, but it has been built through repetition. The emotion is not created in the moment. It is recalled from a pattern. Over time, these emotional patterns influence behavior, guiding decisions without conscious awareness. The environment plays a significant role in this process. What you hear, see, and experience repeatedly becomes part of your internal dialogue. Conversations, media, and daily interactions all contribute to the patterns in your mind. The brain absorbs these inputs and turns them into repeated thoughts. Over time, these external influences become internal beliefs. The person may not realize how much their thinking has been shaped by repetition from their surroundings. It feels personal, even when it was influenced externally. Repetition also affects how you interpret situations. Two people can experience the same event, but see it differently because of their repeated thoughts. One may focus on opportunity, while the other focuses on limitation. This difference does not come from the event itself. It comes from the patterns in their mind. Repeated thinking creates a lens through which reality is viewed. This lens determines what is noticed and how it is understood. Another important aspect is how repetition influences behavior. When a thought appears frequently, it begins guiding action. A person who repeatedly thinks about delay may hesitate to start tasks. Someone who repeats thoughts of progress may act more quickly. These behaviors feel natural because they follow familiar patterns. Over time, repeated behavior leads to consistent outcomes. What begins as a thought becomes an action, and repeated action becomes a result. Repetition also creates a sense of certainty. When a thought has been repeated enough times, it feels unquestionable. The person stops examining it because it seems obvious. This certainty can be helpful when the pattern is constructive, but it can also limit growth when it is not. The mind resists changing what feels certain, even if it is not accurate. This is why repeated thoughts can be difficult to challenge. They feel true simply because they have been practiced. Breaking this cycle requires awareness of repetition. When you begin noticing which thoughts appear most often, you start understanding what is shaping your reality. This awareness allows you to question patterns instead of following them automatically. You begin to see that repetition is creating your perspective. Once this is recognized, change becomes possible. You can choose which thoughts to reinforce and which to reduce. Replacing repetition is not immediate. The mind returns to familiar patterns because they are easier to access. Creating new patterns requires consistent effort. Each time a new thought is repeated, it strengthens its pathway slightly. Over time, this new repetition begins to compete with the old one. The process is gradual, but it becomes powerful through consistency. The mind adapts to what is practiced most often. Attention plays a key role in this process. What you focus on determines what you repeat. If attention is directed towards certain ideas, they become more frequent. By guiding attention intentionally, you influence what is repeated. This control allows you to reshape your thinking over time. The mind follows where attention goes, reinforcing those patterns. Understanding that repetition becomes reality changes how you approach your thoughts. You begin to see them not as fixed truths, but as patterns that have been practiced. This realization removes the sense of permanence. You understand that what has been repeated can be changed through new repetition. The mind is not locked into one way of thinking. It adapts, based on what it practices. In the end, repetition quietly shapes everything you experience. It builds beliefs, influences emotions, and guides behavior. What feels like reality is often the result of what has been repeated most often in your mind. When you become aware of this process, you gain the ability to change it. By choosing what to repeat, You begin shaping a different reality, one thought at a time. Chapter 3. Thoughts feel true, not because they are. A thought can feel convincing without being accurate. The mind often presents ideas with a sense of certainty, and that feeling is mistaken for truth. When a thought appears repeatedly, it carries familiarity, and familiarity creates comfort. That comfort is interpreted as correctness. Over time, the line between what feels true and what is true becomes blurred. A person may believe something about themselves, their abilities, or their situation simply because it has been thought many times before. The mind does not always verify ideas. It recognizes patterns. When a pattern is strong, it presents itself with confidence. This is how thoughts gain authority without being examined. They feel real because they are familiar, not because they have been tested. The brain is designed to conserve energy. It prefers shortcuts over constant analysis. When a thought appears frequently, the mind stops questioning it. It becomes an automatic response rather than a considered idea. This efficiency is useful for routine tasks, but it can create limitations in thinking. A person may assume certain beliefs are facts without ever examining them. The mind accepts repetition as evidence, even when no real proof exists. This is how inaccurate ideas can become deeply rooted. Emotions often reinforce this illusion. When a thought is connected to a strong feeling, it becomes more convincing. Anxiety can make a negative thought feel urgent. Confidence can make a positive thought feel certain. The emotion adds weight to the idea, making it harder to question. The person may not separate the feeling from the thought. They assume that because it feels intense, it must be true. This connection strengthens the pattern, allowing it to repeat more easily in the future. Past experiences also shape which thoughts feel believable. If a person has encountered similar situations before, the mind recalls those experiences and applies them to the present. This can create assumptions that may not be accurate. The current situation is interpreted through past patterns, even if the context has changed. The thought feels true because it matches what has been experienced before. However, this does not guarantee that it applies now. The mind uses familiarity as a guide, not accuracy. The speed of thinking contributes to this effect. Thoughts appear quickly, often without conscious awareness. There is little time to evaluate them before they influence behavior. The person reacts based on the first idea that comes to mind. This speed makes it difficult to distinguish between truth and assumption. The thought feels immediate and natural, so it is followed without question. Slowing down this process is necessary to create space for evaluation. Language also plays a role in how thoughts are perceived. The way a thought is framed can make it seem more convincing. Absolute statements, such as always or never, create a sense of certainty. These words give the impression that the idea is fixed and unquestionable. Over time, this language reinforces the belief, making it feel more solid. The person begins to accept it as a permanent truth, even though it may not be accurate. Another factor is selective attention. The mind tends to notice information that confirms existing beliefs. If a person believes a certain thought is true, they will look for evidence that supports it. Contradictory information is often ignored or minimized. This creates a feedback loop where the thought is reinforced repeatedly. The person becomes more convinced because they are only seeing one side of the situation. This selective focus strengthens the illusion of truth. Questioning thoughts disrupts this pattern. When a person begins asking whether a thought is accurate, the automatic process slows down. They create distance between the thought and their response. This allows for evaluation. The person can consider alternative perspectives and examine evidence. This process weakens the authority of the thought. It becomes one possibility rather than a fixed truth. Over time, This habit of questioning reduces the influence of unexamined beliefs. Replacing thoughts requires intentional repetition. Once a thought is recognized as inaccurate, it can be adjusted. The person introduces a new perspective and repeats it consistently. This new repetition begins to form a different pattern. The mind adapts gradually, making the new thought more accessible over time. This process is not immediate, but it becomes effective through consistency. The brain learns what is practiced most often. Awareness is essential in this transformation. Without noticing thoughts, they continue influencing behavior automatically. When a person observes their thinking, they begin identifying patterns. They see which ideas repeat and how they affect actions. This awareness creates the opportunity to change. The person is no longer controlled by every thought that appears. They begin guiding their thinking intentionally. Understanding that thoughts feel true does not mean they are true, changes how you relate to your mind. You begin to see thoughts as events rather than facts. They are signals that can be observed and evaluated. This perspective reduces their control. The person becomes less reactive because they are not accepting every thought as reality. In the end, thoughts gain their power from repetition and familiarity, not from accuracy. They feel convincing because they have been practiced, not because they are correct. When you recognize this, you create space to question and adjust your thinking. This space allows you to choose which thoughts to follow and which to release. Over time, this process reshapes how you see yourself and the world around you. Chapter 4. Conditioning shapes your decisions. Every decision you make is influenced by something that existed before the moment of choice. This influence is called conditioning. It is the accumulation of experiences, repeated thoughts, learned behaviors, and emotional responses that shape how you react to situations. Conditioning works quietly, guiding your decisions without asking for your attention. When faced with a choice, the mind does not always evaluate it from the beginning. It refers to what it already knows. This creates a response that feels immediate and natural. You believe you are choosing freely, but often you are following a pattern that has been built over time. This pattern determines how you interpret situations, what options you consider, and which direction feels right. Conditioning begins early, long before you are aware of it. From your environment, interactions, and experiences, the mind starts learning how to respond. Each repeated experience strengthens certain reactions. Over time, these reactions become automatic. You do not question them because they feel familiar. The mind associates familiarity with correctness, even when it may not be accurate. This is how conditioning becomes powerful. It blends into your thinking, making it difficult to recognize as something separate from your identity. One of the ways conditioning shapes decisions is through expectation. The mind anticipates outcomes based on past experiences. If a situation has previously led to a certain result, the mind expects the same result again. This expectation influences how you approach the situation. You may act cautiously, confidently, or avoid it altogether based on what you expect to happen. The decision feels logical, but it is influenced by conditioning rather than a fresh evaluation of the current situation. Emotional conditioning also plays a significant role. The mind links certain experiences with specific emotions. When a similar situation arises, the same emotion appears automatically. This emotional response influences decision-making. A feeling of discomfort may lead to avoidance, while a feeling of confidence may lead to action. These emotions are not always based on the present moment. They are often responses to patterns learned in the past. This makes it difficult to separate current reality from conditioned reactions. Conditioning also affects how you interpret information. Two people can face the same situation and make completely different decisions. This difference comes from their conditioning. Each person processes information through their own patterns of thinking. What feels like the correct choice is influenced by how the mind has been trained. This creates a personal version of reality, shaped by past experiences rather than objective evaluation. Habits are a visible expression of conditioning. Repeated actions become automatic, requiring little thought. When a situation triggers a habit, the decision is made instantly. The person does not analyze whether the action is useful. They simply follow the pattern. This reduces effort, but also limits flexibility. The mind prefers repeating known behaviors rather than exploring new ones. Over time, these habits reinforce conditioning, making it stronger. Another effect of conditioning is the creation of mental shortcuts. The mind simplifies decision-making by relying on familiar responses. These shortcuts save time but reduce awareness. Instead of considering all possible options, the mind chooses what it already knows. This can lead to consistent behavior, but it can also prevent growth. The person may miss opportunities because their decisions are limited by conditioned patterns. Breaking conditioning begins with awareness. When you start observing your decisions, you begin to notice patterns. You see how similar situations lead to similar responses. This recognition reveals the influence of conditioning. Instead of reacting automatically, you create a pause. In that pause, you can evaluate whether the response is useful or simply familiar. This awareness is the first step toward change. Once conditioning is recognized, it can be adjusted. The mind can learn new patterns through repetition. Each time you choose a different response, you weaken the old conditioning slightly. Over time, the new response becomes more familiar. The process is gradual, but it becomes powerful through consistency. The mind adapts to what it practices, allowing new patterns to replace old ones. Attention plays a key role in reshaping conditioning. What you focus on repeatedly influences what the mind learns. By directing attention toward constructive thinking, you begin building new patterns. This intentional focus strengthens new responses, making them easier to access. Over time, these new patterns begin guiding decisions instead of the old ones. Understanding conditioning changes how you see your decisions. You begin to recognize that not every choice is a result of free thinking. Many are influenced by past repetition. This realization creates space for intentional action. You are no longer limited to automatic responses. You can choose to evaluate and adjust your decisions. In the end, conditioning shapes your decisions by creating patterns that feel natural. These patterns guide your thinking, emotions, and behavior without being noticed. But once you become aware of them, their influence begins to weaken. You gain the ability to choose differently, creating decisions that are guided by awareness rather than repetition. Chapter 5. Awareness reveals the system. Awareness is the moment where automatic patterns begin to lose their control. Most of the time, the mind operates without being observed. Thoughts appear, emotions follow, and actions happen almost instantly. This sequence feels natural because it is familiar, but when awareness is present, something changes. You begin to notice the process instead of being carried by it. A thought appears, and instead of immediately reacting, you observe it. This observation creates distance. In that distance, the system that once operated invisibly starts to become visible. You begin to see that your reactions are not random. They follow patterns. Awareness does not stop the system immediately, but it reveals how it works. And once something is seen clearly, it can no longer control you in the same way. The system within the mind depends on repetition and unconscious response. It continues functioning because it is not questioned. Awareness interrupts this cycle. When you observe your thoughts, you begin to recognize repetition. You notice how the same ideas appear in different situations. This recognition weakens the automatic nature of the system. The mind is no longer acting without attention, it is being watched. This changes the dynamic completely. The system relies on invisibility. Awareness removes that invisibility. Awareness also changes how you relate to your thoughts. Instead of identifying with every idea that appears, you begin to see thoughts as events rather than facts. A thought arises, but you do not immediately accept it as true. You consider it, observe it, and allow it to pass if necessary. This shift reduces the power of automatic thinking. The mind becomes less reactive because it is no longer following every thought without question. This creates a sense of control that was previously missing. Emotions become clearer through awareness as well. When you are unaware, emotions feel overwhelming because they appear suddenly and seem to define the moment. With awareness, you begin to notice how emotions develop. You see the thought that triggered the feeling. You recognize the pattern behind the reaction. This understanding allows you to respond differently. Instead of being controlled by the emotion, you observe it. This observation reduces its intensity and gives you the ability to choose your response. Another important effect of awareness is the ability to pause. Without awareness, there is little space between thought and action. The mind reacts instantly. With awareness, a gap appears. In that gap, you have the opportunity to decide. You can follow the pattern or choose a different response. This pause is small, but it is powerful. It is the point where automatic behavior can be interrupted. Over time, this pause becomes more natural, allowing for more intentional action. Awareness also reveals the influence of past conditioning. You begin to see how previous experiences shape your current thinking. Patterns that once felt like part of your identity are recognized as learned responses. This realization changes how you view yourself. You understand that your thinking is not fixed, it has been shaped by repetition, and it can be reshaped. This understanding creates freedom because it removes the idea that you are limited by your past. Attention plays a key role in maintaining awareness. Where you direct your attention determines what you notice. When attention is scattered, awareness decreases. When attention is focused, awareness increases. Practicing focus strengthens your ability to observe your thoughts and actions. This practice allows you to remain present, reducing the influence of automatic patterns. Over time, the mind becomes more stable because it is less reactive to distractions. Awareness also improves decision-making. When you are aware, you consider your choices more carefully. You recognize patterns that may influence your decision and evaluate whether they are useful. This leads to more intentional choices. The mind becomes less impulsive because it is not reacting automatically. Instead, it is responding with understanding. This clarity improves the quality of your decisions. Another benefit of awareness is increased clarity in thinking. When you observe your thoughts, you begin to distinguish between useful ideas and unnecessary ones. The mind becomes less cluttered because you are not following every thought that appears. This clarity allows you to focus on what matters. Over time, your thinking becomes more organized and effective. Consistency is essential in developing awareness. It is not something that appears once and remains. It requires regular attention. Each moment of awareness strengthens the habit. Over time, this habit becomes more natural. The mind begins to operate with greater clarity because awareness is present more often. This consistency reduces the influence of automatic patterns. Awareness also creates emotional stability. When you are aware of your thoughts and feelings, you are less likely to be overwhelmed by them. You understand that they are temporary and influenced by patterns. This understanding reduces their control. The mind becomes calmer because it is not reacting automatically to every stimulus. This stability supports better decision-making and consistent action. In the end, awareness reveals the system, by making the invisible visible. It shows you how your mind operates, how patterns form, and how they influence your behavior. Once you see this clearly, you gain the ability to change it. The system does not disappear instantly, but it loses its control. Awareness becomes the foundation for freedom, allowing you to act with intention rather than repetition. Chapter 6. Questioning what you believe. Beliefs feel solid because they have been repeated for a long time, not because they have been examined carefully. Most people carry ideas about themselves, others, and the world without knowing where those ideas came from. They feel like truth because they have always been there. Questioning what you believe begins with recognizing that familiarity is not proof. A belief can feel certain and still be inaccurate. The mind accepts repeated ideas as stable, and stability creates a sense of truth. But when you pause and look closely, you may find that many of these beliefs were formed through limited experiences or untested assumptions. Questioning is not about rejecting everything you think. It is about creating space to examine what has been accepted without awareness. In that space, you begin to see that beliefs are not permanent. They are patterns that can be understood and adjusted. The first challenge in questioning beliefs is noticing them. Many beliefs operate silently, influencing thoughts and actions without being clearly visible. They appear as natural reactions or automatic conclusions. A person may think, "This is just how things are," without realizing that this statement reflects a belief rather than a fact. Awareness reveals these hidden patterns. When you begin observing your thinking, you notice recurring ideas. These ideas often point to underlying beliefs. Once they are seen, they can be examined. Beliefs often originate from past experiences. A single event can shape how the mind interprets similar situations in the future. Over time, repeated experiences reinforce the same interpretation, turning it into a belief. The mind uses these beliefs to predict outcomes and guide decisions. However, past experiences do not always apply to present situations. Questioning beliefs allows you to separate past patterns from current reality. This separation creates clarity, allowing you to respond more effectively. Another source of beliefs is external influence. Family, environment, and repeated messages contribute to how the mind thinks. These influences are absorbed over time and become internal patterns. A person may adopt ideas without consciously choosing them. Questioning beliefs involves recognizing which ideas were learned from others. This recognition allows you to decide whether those beliefs are useful or limiting. Not every belief you hold reflects your own understanding. Some are inherited patterns that can be changed. Emotions often reinforce beliefs, making them harder to question. When a belief is connected to a strong feeling, it becomes more convincing. For example, a belief associated with fear may feel urgent and true. The emotion adds weight to the idea, reducing the likelihood of questioning it. Understanding this connection helps create distance. You begin to see that the feeling does not guarantee accuracy. It is part of the pattern, not proof of truth. Questioning beliefs requires slowing down your thinking. The mind moves quickly, applying familiar ideas without pause. By slowing this process, you create time to evaluate your thoughts. You can ask whether a belief is based on evidence or repetition. This evaluation weakens automatic patterns. The belief loses its certainty when it is examined closely. Over time, this practice becomes easier, allowing you to question ideas more naturally. Another important step is considering alternative perspectives. When a belief is questioned, you can explore other ways of interpreting the same situation. This does not mean replacing one belief with another immediately. It means expanding your understanding. By seeing multiple possibilities, the mind becomes less rigid. This flexibility allows for better decision-making because you are not limited to a single interpretation. Replacing beliefs requires consistent repetition. Once a belief is identified as limiting, a new perspective can be introduced. This new idea must be repeated to become familiar. Over time, the mind begins to accept it as part of its pattern. This process is gradual, but it becomes effective through consistency. The brain adapts to what it practices most often, allowing new beliefs to take hold. Attention plays a role in strengthening or weakening beliefs. What you focus on reinforces certain ideas. If attention is directed toward evidence that supports a belief, it becomes stronger. By shifting attention to different information, you can challenge existing patterns. This intentional focus helps reshape thinking over time. The mind follows what it observes repeatedly. Questioning beliefs also improves decision-making. When you are not limited by unexamined ideas, you can evaluate situations more clearly. Decisions become based on current understanding rather than past assumptions. This clarity allows for more effective action. The mind becomes less reactive and more thoughtful in its approach. Over time, questioning beliefs changes how you relate to your thinking. You begin to see beliefs as flexible rather than fixed. This perspective reduces their control. The mind becomes more open, allowing for growth and adaptation. You are no longer confined by patterns that were never examined. In the end, questioning what you believe creates freedom in thinking. It allows you to move beyond automatic patterns and choose ideas that support your growth. This process requires awareness, patience, and consistency. As beliefs are examined and adjusted, your thinking becomes clearer and your actions become more intentional. Chapter 7. Breaking automatic reactions. Automatic reactions happen so quickly that they feel like part of who you are. A situation appears, and before you are aware of it, a thought forms, an emotion rises, and an action follows. This sequence is not random. It is a pattern built through repetition. The mind has learned to respond in certain ways based on past experiences, and it repeats those responses without asking for your attention. Breaking automatic reactions begins with recognizing that this process exists. What feels like an instant response is often a learned pattern being replayed. Once you see this, you realize that not every reaction is necessary. Some are simply familiar. This realization creates the possibility of change. You begin to understand that between the trigger and your response, there is space. And in that space, you have the ability to choose differently. The first step in breaking automatic reactions is awareness. Without awareness, the reaction completes itself before you notice it. When you begin observing your thoughts and emotions, you start catching the reaction earlier. You notice the thought as it forms, the emotion as it rises. This observation slows down the process. Instead of being carried by it, you begin to see it. This is where control begins. Awareness does not stop the reaction immediately, but it reveals it. Once revealed, it becomes easier to interrupt. Pausing is a powerful tool in this process. When you feel a reaction starting, even a brief pause can change the outcome. The pause creates distance between the trigger and your action. In that moment, you can decide whether to follow the pattern or choose a different response. This pause does not need to be long. Even a few seconds can shift the direction. Over time, practicing this pause strengthens your ability to respond intentionally rather than automatically. Emotions often drive automatic reactions. A feeling appears, and the mind responds immediately to it. Breaking this pattern involves recognizing that emotions are signals, not commands. When you observe the emotion without acting on it instantly, its intensity begins to decrease. You realize that you can experience the feeling without being controlled by it. This separation allows you to respond with greater clarity. Another important aspect is identifying triggers. Automatic reactions are often linked to specific situations, words, or experiences. When you recognize these triggers, you can prepare for them. Awareness of the trigger allows you to anticipate the reaction. Instead of being surprised, you are ready to respond differently. This preparation makes it easier to interrupt the pattern. Breaking automatic reactions also requires questioning the thoughts behind them. When a reaction begins, it is often driven by an underlying belief or assumption. By examining this thought, you can determine whether it is accurate or simply familiar. This evaluation weakens the reaction. The mind becomes less certain, reducing the intensity of the response. Over time, this practice changes how you interpret situations. Replacing reactions with intentional responses takes repetition. The first few times you interrupt a pattern, it may feel unnatural. The old reaction may still appear strongly. However, each time you choose a different response, you weaken the old pattern slightly. Over time, the new response becomes more familiar. The mind adapts to what is practiced consistently. Attention plays a key role in this process. When you focus on your reactions, you become more aware of them. This awareness allows you to catch patterns more quickly. By directing attention inward, you increase your ability to observe and adjust your responses. Over time, this focus strengthens your control over automatic behavior. Breaking automatic reactions also improves relationships and decision-making. When you are not reacting instantly, you can consider your response more carefully. This leads to better communication and more thoughtful actions. The mind becomes less reactive and more deliberate, creating positive outcomes in different areas of life. Consistency is essential in making this change lasting. Interrupting a reaction once is helpful, but repeating the process builds a new habit. Each time you pause and choose differently, you reinforce the new pattern. Over time, this becomes more natural. The mind begins to respond intentionally rather than automatically. As automatic reactions weaken, a sense of control increases. You no longer feel driven by impulses. Instead, you guide your actions based on awareness. This control creates confidence because you trust your ability to respond effectively. The mind becomes more stable, allowing for consistent and intentional behavior. In the end, breaking automatic reactions transforms how you experience life. Situations that once triggered immediate responses become opportunities for choice. The space between stimulus and action becomes a place of control. Through awareness, pause, and repetition, the patterns that once guided you begin to change. Your reactions become responses, and your behavior becomes intentional rather than automatic. Chapter 8. Attention is the real power. Attention determines what your mind builds, strengthens, and repeats. It is not just where you look, but what you give mental energy to over time. Whatever receives your attention becomes more active in your thinking. A single thought may pass quickly, but repeated attention turns it into a pattern. This is why attention is real power. It decides which ideas grow and which fade. Many people believe their thoughts control them, but in reality, attention controls which thoughts survive. When you direct attention consciously, you begin shaping your mental environment. When attention is scattered or automatic, the mind is shaped by whatever appears most often. Understanding this shifts control back to you. You begin to see that your focus is not passive. It is a tool that determines the direction of your thinking. The mind follows attention automatically. If your attention returns to certain ideas repeatedly, the brain strengthens those pathways. Over time, these ideas become easier to access. They appear more frequently, shaping your perception. This process happens quietly. You may not notice how often your attention returns to the same patterns, but the repetition builds a structure in your mind. This structure influences how you interpret situations, how you feel, and how you act. Attention does not just observe, it creates. Distraction weakens this power. When attention is divided, the mind cannot build strong patterns. It jumps between ideas without developing depth. This creates a sense of confusion and reduces clarity. Many people struggle with focus because their attention is constantly pulled in different directions. Without stable attention, it becomes difficult to maintain consistent thinking. The mind remains reactive instead of intentional. Strengthening attention requires reducing unnecessary input and focusing on what matters. Attention also shapes emotional experience. What you focus on influences how you feel. If your attention repeatedly returns to problems, your mind becomes more sensitive to them. If it focuses on solutions, the emotional response changes. This does not ignore reality, but it changes how it is experienced. The same situation can feel overwhelming or manageable, depending on where attention is directed. Over time, this pattern becomes automatic, influencing emotional stability. Another important aspect of attention is its role in learning. The brain adapts to what it focuses on. When attention is directed toward a skill or idea, the mind becomes more familiar with it. This familiarity improves understanding. Repeated focus strengthens knowledge, making it easier to recall and apply. Without attention, learning remains shallow. With focused attention, it becomes deep and lasting. This is why consistent focus is essential for growth. Attention also influences decision-making. When you focus on certain details, they become more important in your evaluation. If attention is directed toward risk, decisions may become cautious. If it is directed toward opportunity, decisions may become proactive. The choice of focus shapes the outcome. By guiding attention, you influence how you evaluate situations. This control improves decision-making because it allows you to consider what is most relevant. The ability to direct attention is a skill that can be developed. At first, the mind may wander frequently. This is natural because attention follows habit. By practicing focus, you strengthen this ability. Each time you bring your attention back to a chosen point, you reinforce control. Over time, the mind becomes more stable. It is less influenced by distractions and more guided by intention. This practice builds mental discipline. Attention also determines which thoughts are reinforced. When a thought appears, it does not become a pattern unless attention stays with it. If you observe a thought without engaging, it fades. If you focus on it, it grows stronger. This means you can choose which thoughts to strengthen. By redirecting attention, you reduce the influence of unwanted patterns. Over time, this reshapes your thinking. Another benefit of controlled attention is clarity. When your focus is steady, your thinking becomes more organized. You can analyze situations more effectively because your mind is not scattered. This clarity improves problem-solving and decision-making. The person becomes more efficient because their attention is not divided. Over time, this leads to better outcomes. Attention also supports breaking old patterns. When you notice a familiar thought or reaction, you can choose where to direct your focus. Instead of following the pattern, you shift attention elsewhere. This interrupts the repetition. Over time, the old pattern weakens because it is no longer reinforced. New patterns begin to form based on where attention is directed. Consistency is essential in using attention effectively. A single moment of focus is not enough to create lasting change. It is repeated attention that shapes the mind. Each time you choose where to focus, you strengthen that direction. Over time, this becomes automatic. The mind follows the patterns you have built intentionally. In the end, attention is the foundation of control within the mind. It determines what grows, what fades, and how you experience the world. By guiding your attention, you shape your thinking, emotions, and actions. This power is always present, but it becomes effective only when used consciously. Attention becomes even more powerful when you realize it is always active, whether you control it or not. The mind is constantly focusing on something, even when you are not aware of it. If you do not guide it, it will follow habits, distractions, and external inputs. This is why many people feel overwhelmed or unfocused. Their attention is being directed by whatever is most stimulating in the moment. When you begin to guide attention intentionally, you shift from reacting to choosing. This shift creates stability. The mind becomes less influenced by external noise and more aligned with your goals. Over time, this control strengthens, allowing you to maintain focus even in environments filled with distraction. Another important aspect of attention is its connection to identity. What you focus on repeatedly shapes how you see yourself. If your attention often returns to doubt or limitation, your identity begins to reflect those ideas. If it focuses on growth and progress, your identity shifts in that direction. This process happens gradually. Each repeated focus reinforces a certain view of yourself. Over time, this view becomes familiar and stable. By directing attention intentionally, you can reshape how you perceive your abilities and potential. Attention also determines the quality of your experiences. When your focus is scattered, even meaningful moments can feel empty. When your attention is fully present, simple experiences become more engaging. This presence improves both productivity and satisfaction. The mind becomes more connected to what is happening, reducing the sense of distraction. Over time, this ability to stay present enhances both work and daily life. The person begins to experience depth rather than constant movement between thoughts. Another key effect of attention is its role in breaking mental noise. The mind often produces continuous thoughts that are not useful. When attention follows these thoughts, they become stronger. By redirecting attention, you reduce their influence. This does not eliminate thoughts completely, but it prevents them from dominating your thinking. Over time, this practice creates a quieter mind. The person becomes less reactive to unnecessary mental activity and more focused on what matters. Attention also influences energy. Where you focus determines how your mental energy is used. If attention is spent on unproductive thoughts, energy is drained without progress. When attention is directed toward meaningful tasks, energy is used effectively. This creates a sense of productivity and progress. Over time, managing attention improves how energy is distributed, allowing for sustained effort throughout the day. Another benefit is improved control over habits. Habits are reinforced by repeated attention. When you focus on a certain behavior, you strengthen its pattern. By shifting attention, you can weaken unwanted habits and strengthen new ones. This process requires consistency. Each time you choose where to focus, you influence which habits grow stronger. Over time, this leads to lasting behavioral change. Attention also plays a role in creativity. When the mind is focused, it can explore ideas more deeply. Distraction interrupts this process, preventing the development of new insights. Sustained attention allows the mind to connect ideas and generate solutions. This depth of thinking is essential for creative work. By controlling attention, you create the conditions for innovation and problem-solving. Another important aspect is the ability to recover attention quickly. Even with practice, the mind will wander. What matters is how quickly you bring it back. Each time you notice distraction and return your focus, you strengthen control. This recovery process is part of building attention. Over time, the mind becomes more stable because it is practiced in returning to focus. Attention also supports long-term consistency. When you maintain focus on your goals, you are more likely to take actions that align with them. This consistency leads to steady progress. Without attention, actions become scattered and inconsistent. By keeping your focus aligned, you create a clear direction. This direction supports long-term growth. Another benefit is reduced influence from external distractions. When attention is strong, the mind is less affected by interruptions. You can remain focused even in challenging environments. This independence allows for consistent performance regardless of external conditions. The mind becomes more resilient, maintaining clarity in different situations. Attention also strengthens discipline. When you control where your focus goes, you reduce impulsive behavior. The mind becomes more intentional, choosing actions based on purpose rather than distraction. This discipline supports better decision-making and consistent progress. Over time, it becomes easier to maintain focus because it has been practiced repeatedly. In the end, attention is not just a mental function, it is a tool that shapes your entire experience. By guiding it consistently, you influence your thoughts, actions, and outcomes. This control allows you to move from automatic behavior to intentional living. Over time, attention becomes a reliable force that supports clarity, focus, and growth. Chapter 9. Changing thought loops. Thought loops are patterns of thinking that repeat continuously, often without your awareness. A single idea appears, then returns again and again, shaping how you feel and how you act. These loops can be subtle, but their impact is significant. They influence your perception of situations, your confidence, and your decisions. The mind does not need new input to continue these loops. It simply repeats what it has practiced before. Over time, these repeated thoughts feel automatic. You may not notice how often they appear because they have become familiar. Changing thought loops begins with recognizing that they exist. What feels like constant thinking is often repetition. Once you see this, you begin to understand that your thoughts are not random. They follow patterns that can be observed and changed. Thought loops are strengthened through repetition and attention. Each time you focus on a particular idea, you reinforce it. The brain strengthens the pathway, making the thought easier to access. Over time, the loop becomes dominant. It appears quickly and frequently, influencing your thinking without effort. This is why certain thoughts feel persistent. They have been practiced more than others. The mind becomes efficient at producing what it repeats. This efficiency creates stability, but it can also create limitation when the loop is not useful. Emotions often keep thought loops active. A thought that triggers a strong feeling is more likely to repeat. The emotion adds intensity, making the thought feel important. This creates a cycle where the thought produces the emotion, and the emotion reinforces the thought. Breaking this cycle requires recognizing both elements. When you observe the thought and the emotion separately, you begin to weaken their connection. The loop loses strength because it is no longer being reinforced automatically. Awareness is the first step in changing thought loops. When you begin observing your thinking, you notice patterns. You see how certain ideas repeat in different situations. This awareness creates distance. Instead of being carried by the loop, you watch it. This observation reduces its influence. The thought still appears, but it no longer controls your response in the same way. Awareness turns automatic repetition into something you can understand. Interrupting the loop is the next step. When you notice a repeated thought, you can choose not to follow it. This does not mean forcing it away. It means redirecting your attention. By shifting focus, you prevent the loop from continuing. This interruption weakens the pattern slightly. Over time, repeated interruptions reduce the strength of the loop. The mind begins to produce the thought less frequently because it is not being reinforced. Replacing thought loops requires introducing new patterns. Once a loop is interrupted, a different idea can be repeated. This new thought must be practiced consistently to become effective. Each repetition strengthens the new pathway, making it easier to access. Over time, the new loop begins to replace the old one. The process is gradual, but it becomes powerful through consistency. The mind adapts to what it practices most often. Attention plays a central role in this process. What you focus on determines which loops are reinforced. If attention returns to the same thought repeatedly, the loop remains strong. By directing attention intentionally, you influence which patterns grow. This control allows you to reshape your thinking over time. The mind follows where attention goes, reinforcing those pathways. Environment also affects thought loops. External input can trigger certain patterns. Conversations, media, and daily experiences all influence what the mind repeats. By adjusting your environment, you can reduce triggers for unwanted loops. This makes it easier to maintain new patterns. The mind adapts to what it is exposed to frequently, so changing your environment supports the process of change. Consistency is essential in changing thought loops. A single interruption will not eliminate a pattern that has been reinforced over time. Each moment of awareness and each redirection of attention contributes to change. Over time, these small adjustments accumulate. The old loop weakens and the new loop becomes stronger. The process requires patience, but it leads to lasting results. Changing thought loops also improves emotional stability. When repetitive negative thinking is reduced, the associated emotions decrease. The mind becomes calmer because it is not constantly reinforcing the same patterns. This stability supports better decision-making and consistent action. The person feels more in control because their thinking is not dominated by automatic repetition. Over time, new thought loops become familiar. What once required effort becomes natural. The mind begins producing constructive thoughts automatically because they have been practiced consistently. This shift changes how you experience situations. You respond differently because your thinking has changed. The process becomes self-sustaining as the new loop reinforces itself. In the end, changing thought loops transforms how the mind operates. Repetition no longer controls your thinking automatically. Instead, you guide which patterns are reinforced. Through awareness, interruption, and consistent practice, you reshape your mental patterns. This creates a more intentional way of thinking, allowing you to move beyond automatic repetition and toward conscious control. Changing thought loops becomes more effective when you understand that they often begin in subtle ways. A small idea appears, and if it is not noticed, it continues repeating quietly. Over time, this repetition builds strength until it becomes dominant. The mind begins returning to it automatically, even without a clear reason. Recognizing these early stages allows you to intervene before the loop becomes strong. When a thought first appears, observing it without engagement prevents it from developing into a pattern. This early awareness reduces the effort required to change it later. The mind is easier to guide when patterns are still forming rather than fully established. Another important aspect of changing thought loops is the ability to detach from them. Detachment does not mean ignoring your thoughts. It means observing them without identifying with them. When you see a thought as something that is happening rather than something that defines you, its influence decreases. The loop loses its authority because it is no longer accepted as truth. This separation creates space for choice. The person can decide whether to continue the pattern or let it pass. Over time, this practice weakens the automatic nature of the loop. Consistency in redirecting attention is essential for lasting change. The mind naturally returns to familiar patterns, especially when they have been practiced for a long time. Each time you notice a loop and shift your focus, you weaken its hold slightly. This process may feel repetitive, but it is necessary. The brain adapts through repetition, and each redirection contributes to change. Over time, the new pattern becomes easier to follow, and the old loop appears less frequently. Another key element is understanding the purpose behind thought loops. Many patterns exist because they were once useful. They may have helped you respond to certain situations or protect you from discomfort. However, what was useful in the past may not be useful now. Recognizing this allows you to approach the loop with understanding rather than resistance. Instead of trying to eliminate it forcefully, you can replace it with a more effective pattern. This approach makes the process smoother and more sustainable. Changing thought loops also requires patience. The mind does not shift instantly. Patterns that have been reinforced over years require time to adjust. A person may still notice old thoughts appearing even after they begin changing them. This does not mean the process is not working. It means the mind is adapting. Each moment of awareness and redirection contributes to gradual change. Over time, the frequency and intensity of the loop decrease. The role of language in thought loops is also significant. The words you use internally influence how thoughts are experienced. Certain phrases can reinforce patterns, making them feel more certain or permanent. By adjusting your internal language, you can change how a thought is perceived. For example, replacing absolute statements with more flexible ones reduces the intensity of the loop. This shift makes it easier to question and adjust the pattern. Another important factor is emotional regulation. Thought loops often become stronger when they are connected to intense emotions. Learning to manage these emotions helps reduce the repetition of the loop. When you remain calm and observe the thought without reacting strongly, it loses its intensity. This makes it easier to redirect attention and introduce new patterns. Emotional stability supports the process of changing thought loops. Changing thought loops also improves focus. When repetitive thinking is reduced, the mind becomes less cluttered. This clarity allows you to concentrate on meaningful tasks. The person becomes more productive because their attention is not consumed by unnecessary patterns. Over time, this improved focus leads to better results in different areas of life. Another benefit is improved self-awareness. As you observe your thought patterns, you gain a deeper understanding of how your mind operates. You begin to see connections between thoughts, emotions, and actions. This understanding allows you to make more informed decisions. The person becomes more intentional in their thinking, reducing automatic behavior. Support from the environment can also influence thought loops. The information you consume and the conversations you engage in can either reinforce old patterns or support new ones. By choosing an environment that encourages growth, you make it easier to maintain new thinking patterns. The mind adapts to what it is exposed to frequently, so creating supportive conditions is important. Changing thought loops also strengthens resilience. When you are no longer controlled by repetitive thinking, you respond to situations more effectively. Challenges become easier to handle because the mind is not stuck in a loop of negative interpretation. This flexibility allows for better problem-solving and decision-making. In the end, changing thought loops is a process of guiding your mind through awareness, patience, and repetition. Each adjustment contributes to a new pattern. Over time, these changes create a more intentional way of thinking. The mind becomes less reactive and more controlled, allowing you to shape your thoughts rather than being shaped by them. Chapter 10. Detaching from mental noise. Mental noise is the constant stream of thoughts that fills your mind throughout the day. It is not always useful, but it feels persistent. Ideas repeat, worries return, and random thoughts appear without invitation. This noise creates the illusion that thinking must always be followed or controlled. In reality, most of these thoughts are automatic patterns that do not require attention. Detaching from mental noise begins with recognizing that not every thought deserves engagement. The mind produces more ideas than you need to act on. When you treat every thought as important, you become overwhelmed. When you observe them without reacting, their influence decreases. This shift changes your relationship with thinking. Instead of being pulled by every thought, you begin to see them as passing events. The first step in detaching is awareness. You need to notice when mental noise is happening. Many thoughts operate in the background, influencing your mood and decisions without being clearly visible. By paying attention, you begin to see how often the same ideas repeat. You recognize patterns that were previously unnoticed. This awareness creates distance. The thought is no longer part of you. It is something you can observe. This separation is important because it reduces the automatic connection between thought and reaction. Mental noise often feels urgent, even when it is not. The mind presents thoughts as if they require immediate attention. This urgency creates pressure. You may feel the need to respond, analyze, or solve something instantly. Detaching involves questioning this urgency. Not every thought needs a response. By allowing the thought to exist without acting on it, you reduce its intensity. Over time, the mind learns that not all thoughts lead to action. Another important aspect is understanding that mental noise is repetitive. Many thoughts are not new. They are repeated patterns that return in different situations. The mind cycles through familiar ideas because they have been reinforced over time. Recognizing this repetition reduces the sense of importance. The thought is not unique or urgent. It is a pattern being replayed. This understanding makes it easier to detach from it. Emotions are often connected to mental noise. A thought can trigger a feeling, and that feeling can reinforce the thought. This creates a cycle where the noise becomes stronger. Detaching involves observing both the thought and the emotion without reacting immediately. When you see the connection, you reduce its power. The emotion loses intensity because it is not being amplified by attention. Breathing and physical awareness can support this process. When the mind becomes noisy, focusing on something simple, like your breath or your surroundings, brings attention back to the present moment. This shift interrupts the loop of thoughts. The mind becomes calmer because it is no longer following the noise. Over time, this practice strengthens your ability to detach. Another important step is reducing identification with thoughts. Many people believe that their thoughts define them. This belief makes it difficult to detach because each thought feels personal. When you understand that thoughts are simply mental events, you create distance. They do not define who you are. They are temporary and can pass without being followed. This perspective reduces their control. Detaching from mental noise does not mean stopping thinking completely. It means choosing which thoughts to engage with. Useful thinking is focused and intentional. Mental noise is repetitive and unfocused. By distinguishing between the two, you can guide your attention more effectively. The mind becomes more organized because it is not reacting to every idea. Consistency is essential in developing this skill. At first, the mind will return to familiar patterns quickly. Detaching requires repeated practice. Each time you notice mental noise and choose not to engage, you strengthen control. Over time, this becomes easier. The mind produces less noise because it is not being reinforced. Another benefit of detaching is improved clarity. When unnecessary thoughts are reduced, you can think more clearly. Decisions become easier because your mind is not cluttered. You can focus on what matters without distraction. This clarity supports better action and more effective problem solving. Detaching also improves emotional stability. When you are not reacting to every thought, your emotions become less intense. You feel calmer because the mind is not constantly amplifying concerns. This stability allows you to respond to situations more effectively rather than reacting impulsively. In the end, detaching from mental noise changes how you experience your mind. Thoughts no longer control your attention automatically. You observe them, choose which to follow, and let the rest pass. This creates a sense of control and clarity. The mind becomes quieter, allowing you to focus on what truly matters. Detaching from mental noise becomes more effective when you realize that silence is not the absence of thought, but the absence of attachment to thought. Many people try to force their minds to become completely quiet, and when thoughts continue to appear, they feel frustrated. But the goal is not to eliminate thinking, it is to change how you relate to it. Thoughts can still exist, but they do not need to control your attention. When you stop resisting them and stop following them, they begin to lose their intensity. This creates a different kind of silence, one that exists even while thoughts pass through the mind. It is a calm awareness that remains steady regardless of what appears. Another important step is learning to observe thoughts without labeling them immediately. The mind often categorizes ideas as good or bad, useful or useless. This labeling creates emotional reactions that strengthen mental noise. When you observe a thought without assigning meaning, it becomes less significant. It is simply something that appeared and will pass. This neutral observation reduces the tendency to engage with unnecessary thinking. Over time, the mind becomes less reactive because it is not constantly evaluating every thought. Mental noise is also fueled by the habit of trying to solve everything at once. The mind jumps between different problems, creating a sense of overload. Detaching involves focusing on one thing at a time. By directing attention to a single task or thought, you reduce the number of ideas competing for attention. This simplifies thinking and creates clarity. The mind becomes more organized because it is not trying to process multiple concerns simultaneously. Another key element is recognizing that not all thoughts require action. Many ideas appear without any need for response. The mind may suggest worries, reminders, or random associations that do not contribute to progress. By allowing these thoughts to pass without engagement, you conserve mental energy. This energy can then be directed toward meaningful tasks. Over time, this practice reduces the volume of mental noise because fewer thoughts are being reinforced. Detaching from mental noise also improves your ability to stay present. When the mind is filled with constant thinking, attention is pulled away from the current moment. This reduces awareness and makes it difficult to engage fully with what you are doing. By reducing unnecessary thoughts, you bring attention back to the present. This improves both focus and experience. The person becomes more connected to their actions, leading to better results and greater satisfaction. Another benefit is improved decision-making. When mental noise is reduced, the mind becomes clearer. You can evaluate situations without interference from unrelated thoughts. This clarity allows for more effective decisions because you are focusing on relevant information. The person becomes less impulsive and more thoughtful in their choices. Over time, this leads to better outcomes. Detaching also changes how you handle uncertainty. Mental noise often increases when the mind tries to predict or control the future. This creates worry and overthinking. By detaching from these thoughts, you reduce their influence. The mind becomes more comfortable with uncertainty because it is not constantly trying to resolve it. This creates a sense of calm, allowing you to focus on what can be controlled in the present moment. Another important aspect is the role of patience. Detaching from mental noise is not an instant process. The mind has been practicing certain patterns for a long time, and it takes time to change them. Each moment of awareness contributes to this change. Over time, the mind produces fewer unnecessary thoughts because they are not being reinforced. Patience allows this process to unfold naturally. Detaching also strengthens your ability to focus deeply. When the mind is not filled with distractions, it can engage fully with a task. This deep focus improves both efficiency and quality of work. The person becomes more productive because their attention is not divided. Over time, this ability to concentrate becomes a valuable skill. Another benefit is emotional balance. When you are not reacting to every thought, your emotions become more stable. The mind is no longer amplifying concerns or creating unnecessary stress. This stability allows you to respond to situations calmly and effectively. The person becomes less reactive and more composed. Detaching from mental noise also improves self-awareness. As you observe your thoughts, you begin to understand how your mind operates. You see patterns that were previously hidden. This understanding allows you to make more intentional choices. The person becomes more aware of their thinking and how it influences their actions. In the end, detaching from mental noise creates a quieter, more focused mind. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer control your attention. You choose what to engage with and what to let go. This creates clarity, stability, and control. Over time, this approach transforms how you experience your mind, allowing you to move through life with greater awareness and intention. Chapter 11. Rebuilding your thinking. Rebuilding your thinking begins with accepting that your current patterns were learned, not fixed. The mind has been shaped by repetition, experience, and attention over time. What feels natural today was once unfamiliar. This means it can be changed. The first step is not forcing new thoughts, but recognizing that change is possible. When you see your thinking as flexible, you remove the idea that you are limited by it. This shift creates openness. Instead of reacting automatically, you begin observing how your thoughts are formed. This awareness is the foundation for rebuilding. Without it, new patterns cannot take hold because the old ones remain unnoticed. The next step is identifying which patterns need to change. Not all thoughts are unhelpful. Some support growth and clarity, while others create limitation. By observing your thinking, you begin to distinguish between them. You notice which ideas lead to hesitation, confusion, or unnecessary stress. These patterns become the focus of change. Recognizing them clearly allows you to address them directly rather than reacting to them unconsciously. Rebuilding thinking requires introducing new perspectives. When a limiting thought appears, you replace it with a more balanced idea. This does not mean ignoring reality or forcing positivity. It means choosing a perspective that supports effective action. The new thought may not feel natural at first, but repetition strengthens it. Over time, the mind begins to accept it as familiar. This process gradually reshapes how you interpret situations. Repetition is essential in this transformation. The mind learns through practice. Each time you repeat a new way of thinking, you strengthen its pathway. This makes it easier for the thought to appear in the future. The process is gradual because old patterns have been reinforced for a long time. Consistent repetition is what allows new patterns to replace them. Without repetition, change remains temporary. Attention plays a central role in rebuilding thinking. What you focus on determines which thoughts are reinforced. By directing attention toward constructive ideas, you strengthen them. At the same time, reducing attention to unhelpful thoughts weakens them. This balance allows the mind to shift gradually. The more you focus on useful patterns, the more dominant they become. Another important aspect is emotional alignment. Thoughts and emotions are connected. When you change your thinking, your emotional responses begin to shift. A more balanced thought creates a calmer emotional state. This emotional stability supports consistent action. Over time, the connection between new thoughts and positive emotions strengthens, making the pattern easier to maintain. Rebuilding thinking also involves changing how you respond to challenges. Instead of reacting with hesitation or avoidance, you approach situations with curiosity and effort. This shift changes the outcome. The mind begins associating challenges with growth rather than difficulty. Over time, this pattern becomes automatic, influencing how you act in different situations. Consistency is critical in this process. Occasional effort will not create lasting change. Each moment of awareness and each intentional thought contributes to rebuilding. The accumulation of these moments leads to transformation. The mind adapts slowly, but consistently, to what is practiced most often. Another benefit of rebuilding thinking is improved clarity. As unhelpful patterns are reduced, the mind becomes less cluttered. This clarity allows for better decision-making. The person can focus on what matters without being distracted by unnecessary thoughts. Over time, this clarity becomes a stable part of their thinking. Rebuilding thinking also strengthens self-trust. As you practice new patterns, you begin to rely on your ability to guide your mind. This trust grows through experience. The person becomes more confident in their thinking because it is intentional rather than automatic. This confidence supports consistent progress. The environment also influences this process. What you expose your mind to affects how it develops. By choosing information and experiences that support growth, you reinforce new patterns. The mind adapts to its surroundings, so creating a supportive environment makes rebuilding easier. In the end, rebuilding your thinking is a continuous process. It is not about reaching a final state, but about maintaining awareness and adjusting patterns as needed. Over time, the mind becomes more aligned with intentional thinking. This alignment leads to clearer decisions, better actions, and a more stable way of experiencing life. Rebuilding your thinking becomes more effective when you begin to slow down your internal reactions. The mind is used to responding quickly, often without awareness. This speed makes it difficult to introduce new patterns because the old ones take control immediately. By slowing down your response, even slightly, you create space to guide your thinking. In that space, you can choose a different perspective. This shift may feel small, but it has a significant impact over time. Each moment of deliberate thinking weakens automatic patterns and strengthens intentional ones. The mind gradually adapts to this slower, more controlled approach, making it easier to maintain clarity. Another important aspect of rebuilding your thinking is consistency in small moments. Change does not come from occasional effort, but from repeated practice in everyday situations. Each time you notice a familiar thought and choose a different response, you contribute to a new pattern. These small adjustments may seem insignificant at first, but they accumulate. Over time, they create a noticeable shift in how you think and act. The mind learns from repetition, so consistent effort in small moments leads to lasting change. Rebuilding your thinking also involves letting go of the need to control every thought. The mind will continue producing ideas, some of which may not be useful. Trying to eliminate these thoughts completely creates resistance. Instead, the focus should be on guiding which thoughts you engage with. By allowing unnecessary thoughts to pass without attention, you reduce their influence. This approach creates a more flexible and calm mental environment. The mind becomes easier to manage because it is not overwhelmed by constant control. Another key element is developing patience with the process. The mind has been shaped over many years, and rebuilding it takes time. There may be moments where old patterns return strongly. This does not mean progress has been lost. It means the mind is still adjusting. Each time you respond differently, you reinforce the new pattern. Over time, the old patterns appear less frequently. Patience allows this process to unfold naturally without frustration. Rebuilding your thinking also strengthens your ability to stay present. When your mind is focused on the current moment, it is easier to guide your thoughts. You are less influenced by past patterns or future concerns. This presence creates clarity. The person becomes more aware of their thinking and can adjust it more effectively. Over time, this habit of staying present supports consistent and intentional thinking. Another benefit is improved emotional control. As your thinking becomes more intentional, your emotional responses become more stable. You are less likely to react impulsively because you are observing your thoughts before acting. This creates a sense of balance. The person can respond to situations calmly and thoughtfully. Over time, this emotional stability becomes part of their behavior. Rebuilding your thinking also enhances problem-solving skills. When your mind is not limited by old patterns, you can approach situations with greater flexibility. You consider different perspectives and explore new solutions. This adaptability improves your ability to handle challenges. The person becomes more confident in their ability to find effective solutions because they are not restricted by automatic thinking. Another important aspect is the role of focus. When you direct your attention toward constructive ideas, you strengthen those patterns. This focus reduces the influence of unhelpful thoughts. Over time, the mind becomes more aligned with productive thinking. The person is able to maintain clarity because their attention is directed intentionally. Rebuilding your thinking also improves decision-making. When your thoughts are clear and organized, you can evaluate situations more effectively. You are not influenced by unnecessary patterns or distractions. This clarity leads to better decisions. The person becomes more confident in their choices because they are based on intentional thinking. Another benefit is increased confidence in your ability to change. As you see your thinking shift over time, you realize that you are not limited by your past patterns. This realization strengthens your belief in your ability to grow. The person becomes more open to new experiences because they trust their ability to adapt. Rebuilding your thinking also creates long-term stability. When your mind is guided by intentional patterns, it becomes less reactive to external influences. You are not easily affected by distractions or negative input. This stability allows you to maintain focus and continue progressing. Over time, this creates a consistent approach to thinking and action. In the end, rebuilding your thinking is about creating a system that supports your growth. Through awareness, repetition, and patience, you reshape how your mind operates. This process leads to clearer thinking, better decisions, and a more stable mindset. Over time, your thinking becomes a tool that works for you, guiding your actions with purpose and clarity. Chapter 12. Living with Clarity and Control. Living with clarity and control begins when your mind is no longer reacting automatically to everything that appears. Instead of being pulled by every thought, emotion, or external situation, you start guiding your responses with awareness. Clarity means seeing things as they are, not as your patterns interpret them. Control means choosing how to respond rather than reacting without thinking. This state is not about perfection, it is about presence. You begin noticing your thoughts, understanding your emotions, and acting with intention. The mind becomes less chaotic because it is not constantly following unnecessary patterns. Over time, this creates a sense of stability. You are no longer overwhelmed by your own thinking. Instead, you are aware of it, and that awareness gives you control. Clarity develops when mental noise is reduced. When your mind is not filled with constant repetition, you can focus on what matters. Thoughts become more organized because they are not competing for attention. This allows you to see situations more accurately. You begin understanding the difference between what is real and what is imagined. This understanding improves your ability to make decisions because you are not influenced by unnecessary thoughts. The mind becomes clearer, and that clarity supports better action. Control comes from the ability to pause. When something happens, your first reaction may still appear, but instead of following it immediately, you create a gap. In that gap, you decide how to respond. This pause gives you control over your behavior. It allows you to act intentionally rather than automatically. Over time, this becomes natural. The mind becomes less reactive because it is used to waiting before responding. This creates consistency in your actions. Living with clarity also improves how you handle emotions. Instead of being overwhelmed by what you feel, you observe it. You recognize that emotions are temporary and influenced by patterns. This understanding reduces their intensity. You are able to experience emotions without losing control. This creates balance. The person becomes more stable because they are not reacting impulsively to every feeling. Another important aspect is focus. When your mind is clear, your attention becomes stronger. You can concentrate on tasks without being distracted by unnecessary thoughts. This improves productivity because your energy is directed toward what matters. Over time, this focus becomes a habit. The mind becomes more efficient, allowing you to complete tasks with greater ease. Clarity also improves relationships. When you are aware of your thoughts and reactions, you communicate more effectively. You listen without immediate judgment and respond thoughtfully. This reduces misunderstandings and creates better connections. The person becomes more present in interactions, which improves the quality of communication. Control over your thinking also reduces stress. When you are not reacting to every thought, your mind becomes calmer. You are less affected by worry or overthinking because you understand that not all thoughts need attention. This creates a sense of peace. The person becomes more relaxed because their mind is not constantly active in unnecessary ways. Living with clarity allows you to make better decisions. When your thinking is not clouded by patterns, you can evaluate situations more effectively. You consider what is important and choose accordingly. This leads to better outcomes because your decisions are based on understanding rather than reaction. Over time, this improves your ability to handle different situations. Another benefit is increased confidence. When you have control over your thinking, you trust your ability to respond effectively. This trust comes from experience. You have seen that you can guide your thoughts and actions. This creates confidence that is stable because it is based on awareness rather than external validation. Clarity also supports long-term growth. When your mind is focused and intentional, you are able to maintain consistent progress. You are not distracted by unnecessary thoughts or influenced by temporary emotions. This consistency allows you to move forward steadily. Over time, this leads to meaningful development. Living with clarity and control also creates independence. You are not dependent on external conditions to feel stable. Your state of mind is guided by your awareness. This independence allows you to remain consistent regardless of what is happening around you. The person becomes more resilient because they rely on their own understanding. In the end, living with clarity and control transforms how you experience life. Your thoughts become tools rather than obstacles. Your reactions become choices rather than habits. You move through situations with awareness, responding with intention. This creates a sense of stability, focus, and direction. Over time, your life reflects this clarity, allowing you to act with purpose and confidence. Living with clarity and control deepens when you begin to trust your awareness more than your impulses. The mind will still produce immediate reactions, but you no longer treat them as commands. You observe them, understand them, and decide whether they deserve action. This shift creates a quiet strength. Instead of being pushed by internal noise, you become guided by intention. Over time, this builds a steady form of confidence. You no longer feel uncertain in your responses because you know you can pause, evaluate, and act with clarity. This trust in your awareness becomes a foundation. It allows you to move through situations with a sense of control that does not depend on perfect conditions. Another important change is how you handle complexity. Life presents situations that are not always simple or predictable. Without clarity, these situations can feel overwhelming, but when your thinking is organized and intentional, complexity becomes manageable. You break situations into smaller parts, focusing on what you can understand and influence. This approach reduces confusion. The mind becomes more structured, allowing you to respond effectively even in challenging circumstances. Over time, this ability strengthens your problem-solving skills and reduces the sense of overwhelm. Clarity also improves how you use your energy. When your mind is controlled, you are not wasting energy on unnecessary thoughts. This allows you to direct your effort toward meaningful actions. You become more efficient because your attention is not divided. Each action becomes more effective because it is supported by focused thinking. Over time, this leads to better results with less effort. The person begins to experience a sense of flow, where actions align naturally with their intentions. Control over your thinking also strengthens your ability to remain consistent. When your actions are guided by awareness rather than impulse, they become more stable. You do not rely on motivation or external pressure to act. Instead, you follow a pattern of intentional behavior. This consistency supports long-term progress. The person becomes reliable in their actions, which leads to steady growth over time. Another benefit is the ability to adapt without losing direction. Clarity does not mean rigidity. It means understanding your direction while remaining flexible in your approach. When situations change, you adjust your actions without becoming confused. The mind remains focused because it is guided by clear intentions. This adaptability allows you to handle uncertainty more effectively. Over time, this creates resilience and confidence in your ability to navigate different situations. Living with clarity also enhances your ability to learn. When your mind is focused and organized, you can absorb information more effectively. You are not distracted by unnecessary thoughts, so your attention remains on what you are learning. This improves understanding and retention. Over time, this ability to learn efficiently supports continuous growth. Another important aspect is the reduction of unnecessary conflict. When you are aware of your thoughts and emotions, you are less likely to react impulsively in difficult situations. You can choose your responses carefully, which reduces misunderstandings. This leads to more constructive interactions with others. The person becomes more composed and thoughtful in their communication. Clarity also improves your relationship with time. When your thinking is intentional, you use time more effectively. You focus on actions that contribute to your goals rather than being distracted by unnecessary tasks. This creates a sense of progress. Over time, this efficient use of time leads to better results and a more structured approach to daily life. Control over your mind also reduces dependency on external validation. When your actions are guided by your own understanding, you do not need constant reassurance from others. This independence creates stability. The person becomes more confident because their decisions are based on internal clarity rather than external approval. Another benefit is the ability to maintain calm in challenging situations. When your mind is not reacting automatically, you can remain composed even under pressure. This calmness allows you to think clearly and act effectively. Over time, this becomes a natural response, making it easier to handle stress and uncertainty. Living with clarity and control also strengthens your sense of purpose. When your thinking is aligned with your goals, your actions feel more meaningful. You understand why you are doing what you are doing. This understanding increases motivation and commitment. Over time, this sense of purpose supports consistent effort and growth. In the end, living with clarity and control creates a stable and intentional way of experiencing life. You are no longer guided by automatic patterns or external influences. Instead, you move forward with awareness, focus, and purpose. This approach leads to consistent progress, better decisions, and a more balanced state of mind. The system you are trying to escape was never outside of you. It was built slowly, through repeated thoughts, habits, and patterns that became automatic. Once you begin to see this clearly, something changes. You stop reacting without awareness. You begin to notice the space between a thought and your response. That space is where freedom exists. You do not need to control every thought. You only need to stop following them blindly. Over time, awareness weakens the patterns that once guided you. Your decisions become clearer, your reactions calmer, and your direction more intentional. The mind that once controlled you becomes something you can guide. And from that point, your life begins to move differently, not because the world changed, but because you did.